The sound of a child's soft cry echoed through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek as Rebecca Turner clutched her infant daughter closer to her chest. The year was 1875, and the West was as unforgiving as the men who sought to tame it. At 22, Rebecca had already seen enough heartache to last several lifetimes, but nothing could have prepared her for what was about to happen. Rebecca had traveled west with dreams of a new beginning after her husband's death from consumption back in Philadelphia. She had arrived in the small mining town of Redemption Creek 3 months ago, with just enough money to rent a modest room above the general store. Each day she worked at the town's only restaurant, serving meals to dusty miners and trail-worn cowboys, all while caring for 6-month-old Emma. The work was hard, but she managed, even setting aside a small portion of her earnings for the future she hoped to build. Tonight, she hurried along the boardwalk, anxious to get home before Emma became too fussy. The child had been colicky all day, and Rebecca's arms ached from the long hours of holding her while balancing plates of food for hungry patrons. "Miss Turner," a voice called from the shadows. Rebecca turned to see Walter Hastings, the restaurant owner, his bulky frame blocking her path. "I need a word with you." Rebecca shifted Emma to her other arm. "Mr. Hastings, it's late. Can this wait until morning?" Hastings stepped closer, his breath sour with whiskey. "I'm afraid not. You see, I've been doing some calculating. You owe me money, Miss Turner." "That can't be right," Rebecca protested. "I've paid my rent on time every week." "Not just rent," Hastings said, his voice dropping lower. "There's been breakage in the kitchen, food that's gone missing, and customers who've complained about your service." He pulled out a ledger from his coat pocket. "By my reckoning, you owe me nearly $80. Rebecca felt her blood run cold. It was a preposterous sum, more than she could earn in 2 months of work. "That's not possible. I've been careful with everything." "Are you calling me a liar?" Hastings' face reddened. "I've been generous letting you keep that brat with you during working hours. Most would have turned you away." Emma began to cry louder, sensing her mother's distress. "Please, Mr. Hastings. I don't have that kind of money, but I can work extra shifts." "Too late for that," he cut her off. "I've already made other arrangements. Mr. Sullivan from the Silver Dollar Saloon has been looking for new girls, and he's willing to take on your debt." Rebecca's heart pounded against her ribs. You sold my contract? To a saloon. Consider yourself lucky. He's paying good money, and he's even willing to let you keep your room for the child." Hastings smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "You start tomorrow night." "No," Rebecca backed away. "I won't work in a saloon." "I can't." Hastings grabbed her arm, causing Emma to wail louder. "You don't have a choice, girl. You either work for Sullivan or I'll have the sheriff throw you in jail for theft. Then what happens to your child?" Rebecca felt trapped, her mind racing for a solution. "Give me until tomorrow to think about it." "Fine." Hastings released her arm. "But don't try running. This is a small town, and there's nowhere to go but desert for 50 miles. Sullivan will come by at noon to collect what's his." Rebecca hurried back to her room, tears blurring her vision. Once inside, she placed Emma in the small cradle she had purchased with her first wages and sank onto the edge of her bed. The baby, exhausted from crying, quickly fell asleep. Rebecca paced the small room, considering her options. She had less than $5 saved, not enough for stage passage anywhere. She had no family to turn to, no friends close enough to help. As midnight approached, she made a desperate decision. She would leave Redemption Creek on foot, following the stage route east. It would be dangerous, but staying meant certain ruin. She packed her few possessions, 2 dresses, Emma's clothes, a blanket, and what little food she had into a small carpet bag. Just before dawn, she lifted the sleeping Emma and quietly made her way down the back stairs of the building. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when Rebecca reached the edge of town. Her arms already ached from carrying both the baby and her bag, but determination pushed her forward. 1 mile turned into 2, and the sun began to rise higher, beating down mercilessly. By midday, Rebecca was struggling. Her water was half gone, and Emma had become fussy in the heat. Finding a small outcropping of rocks that provided some shade, she sat to rest and feed her daughter. Not the safest place for a lady and child, a deep voice observed. Rebecca startled, clutching Emma protectively. A tall man on horseback had approached without her noticing. He wore dusty trail clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. A gun belt hung low on his hips, and his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, snorted and pawed at the ground. "I'm just resting," Rebecca said defensively. "We'll be moving on shortly." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing himself to be younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his late 20s. His features were lean and weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes, a startling blue, were kind. "You're running from something," he stated matter-of-factly. "No one brings a baby out into this heat unless they're desperate." Rebecca remained silent, weighing whether to trust this stranger. "Name's Thomas Wade," he said, removing his hat and running a hand through dark hair streaked with dust. "Most folks call me Tom." "Rebecca Turner," she replied cautiously. "And this is Emma." Tom nodded toward her bag. "You've got supplies for maybe a day. The next town is 3 days' ride. You won't make it on foot." "I don't have much choice," Rebecca admitted, her voice breaking slightly. Tom studied her for a moment. "Trouble in Redemption Creek?" "I worked at Hastings' restaurant. He claims I owe him money I don't have. He sold my contract to the owner of the Silver Dollar." Tom's expression darkened. "Walter Hastings is a cheat and a liar. And Sullivan's no better treats his girls worse than cattle." "You know them?" Rebecca asked. "I know most folks between here and Santa Fe. I drive cattle and sometimes escort the mail coach." He knelt to eye level with Rebecca. "Did anyone see you leave town?" Rebecca shook her head. "I left before dawn." Tom seemed to make a decision. "I'm heading to Fort Collins. There's a ranch they're looking for help, and the owner's wife recently passed. They need someone to cook and keep house." He gestured to Emma. "They won't mind the little one. It's a decent place with decent folks." Rebecca looked at him warily. "Why would you help us?" "Because I've seen what happens to women in Sullivan's saloon," Tom said simply. "And no child deserves that life." Rebecca hesitated, weighing her limited options. This man could be dangerous, but staying put meant certain death from exposure, and returning to Redemption Creek meant a life she couldn't bear. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked. Tom's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "You don't. But I give you my word as a man who was raised right that I mean you no harm. I'm offering help, nothing more." Emma began to fuss again, and Rebecca bounced her gently. "We don't have much choice, do we, little one?" she whispered, then looked back at Tom. "All right, Mr. Wade. We accept your help." Tom nodded. "Good. We should move quickly. Once Hastings discovers you're gone, he'll send men looking." He helped Rebecca to her feet, then took her bag and secured it to his saddle. "I'll need to hold the baby while you mount," he said. Reluctantly, Rebecca handed Emma to him. The baby looked tiny in his large, calloused hands, but he held her with surprising gentleness. Once Rebecca was settled in the saddle, Tom passed Emma back up to her. "Hold her tight," he instructed, then mounted behind Rebecca in one smooth motion. His arms came around her to take the reins, creating a protective circle around both her and the baby. "We'll ride until sundown," he said, his voice close to her ear. "There's a place I know where we can camp safely." As they rode away from Redemption Creek, Rebecca felt fear and hope warring within her. She had placed her trust and her daughter's life in the hands of a stranger, but for the first time in months, she felt the faintest stirring of possibility. Tom kept them moving at a steady pace, careful not to jostle the baby too much. He seemed to know the terrain well, choosing paths that kept them hidden from the main trail while making good time. By late afternoon, Emma had fallen asleep in Rebecca's arms, lulled by the rhythmic motion of the horse. "She's a good baby," Tom observed quietly. "Most would be howling by now." "She's had to be adaptable," Rebecca replied. "It hasn't been an easy start for her." "Her father?" Tom asked tentatively. "Died of consumption before she was born. We were living in Philadelphia. After he passed, I couldn't afford to stay, so I answered an advertisement for workers out west." Rebecca sighed. "James always wanted to see the frontier. I thought perhaps I could make a life for Emma where he had dreamed of going." Tom was silent for a moment. The West isn't kind to lone women, especially those with children. "I've learned that lesson," Rebecca said bitterly. "What about you, Mr. Wade? Do you have family?" "Just Tom, please." He guided the horse around a rocky outcropping. "My parents had a small ranch near Austin. Both gone now. I have a brother in California, but we don't keep in touch much." "So you're alone too." "Been that way so long I hardly notice anymore," Tom admitted. "The trail's company enough most days." As the sun began to set, Tom guided them into a small canyon where a stream trickled between rock walls. Trees provided shelter and firewood, and the canyon walls would hide the light of their fire from any pursuers. Tom dismounted first, then helped Rebecca down, careful not to wake Emma. He quickly set about making camp, gathering wood for a small fire and laying out his bedroll for Rebecca and the baby. "I'll take first watch," he said as he handed her a tin cup of coffee after they had eaten a simple meal of jerky and beans. "Try to get some rest. We have a long ride ahead of us." Rebecca settled on the bedroll with Emma nestled against her. The baby stirred briefly before returning to sleep, one tiny hand curled around her mother's finger. "Thank you," Rebecca said softly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Tom nodded, his face partially shadowed by the firelight. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Turner." "Rebecca," she corrected. "Just Rebecca." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Rebecca, then. Sleep well." As Rebecca drifted off, she found herself wondering about the quiet cowboy who had risked himself to save two strangers. There was a gentleness to him that belied his rough exterior, and despite her wariness, she felt safer than she had in months. Dawn broke with a chorus of birdsong, and Rebecca opened her eyes to find Tom already awake, tending a small fire where coffee bubbled in a battered pot. Emma was still sleeping soundly beside her. "Morning," Tom said, handing her a cup of coffee. "We should get moving soon. I want to put more distance between us and Redemption Creek." Rebecca nodded, taking a grateful sip. "Do you think they'll follow us?" "Hastings is a businessman first. He might send someone to look locally, but a full chase costs money." Tom poured himself coffee. "Still, better safe than sorry." As they broke camp, Rebecca noticed Tom watching the horizon with concern. Following his gaze, she saw a plume of dust in the distance. "Riders?" she asked, her heart quickening. "3, maybe 4, Tom confirmed. "Could be nothing, but we shouldn't take chances." They mounted quickly, Emma secured in a makeshift sling Tom had fashioned from a spare shirt. The horse, sensing urgency, moved swiftly through the rugged terrain, Tom guiding them away from open ground and toward the shelter of a pine forest that covered the lower slopes of a mountain range. "If it is Hastings' men, they'll expect us to follow the stage road," Tom explained. "We'll head north through the mountains instead." The path grew steeper and more treacherous, forcing them to slow their pace. By midday, they had reached a vantage point that allowed them to look back over the terrain they had covered. 3 riders were visible in the distance, clearly following their trail. "They're persistent," Rebecca said anxiously. Tom's expression hardened. "This isn't just about you owing money. Sullivan pays bounties for women who run. Makes an example of them." Rebecca felt ill at the implication. "What do we do?" "We keep moving," Tom said firmly. There's an old mining camp about 10 miles from here. The miners are gone, but the cabins still stand. We can rest there tonight and throw them off our trail. They continued through the afternoon, the horse picking its way carefully through increasingly difficult terrain. Emma remained remarkably calm, occasionally making soft cooing noises, but rarely crying. As dusk approached, they reached the abandoned mining camp nestled in a narrow valley. The camp consisted of 5 small cabins in various states of disrepair surrounding what had once been a central cookhouse. Tom chose the sturdiest-looking cabin and quickly checked it for unwanted inhabitants before ushering Rebecca and Emma inside. "It's not much, but it'll keep us dry if it rains," he said, lighting a lantern he'd brought from his saddlebags. The cabin was sparse, a single room with a rustic bed frame, a table, and 2 chairs. Dust covered everything, but the roof was intact, and the walls seemed solid. "I'll tend to the horse and gather more firewood," Tom said. "There's a small spring behind the cookhouse if you need water." While Tom was outside, Rebecca fed Emma and changed her, using some of their precious water to clean both herself and the baby. The simple act of washing away trail dust lifted her spirits slightly. Tom returned with an armful of wood and what appeared to be wild onions and a rabbit. "Found dinner," he said with a slight smile. "Figured we could use something more substantial than jerky tonight." As Tom prepared the rabbit for cooking, Rebecca ventured a question that had been on her mind. "You said you were taking us to Fort Collins. Do you really know of work there?" Tom nodded, his hands never pausing in their task. "The Bailey Ranch. Old Man Bailey's wife died last winter. Their daughter tried to take over the household duties, but she's getting married soon and moving to Denver. They need help. And they won't mind Emma?" "Sarah Bailey, that's the daughter. She practically raised her younger brothers after their mother took sick. She'll understand about the baby." Tom glanced up at Rebecca. "It's honest work with good people. You could do worse." "And what about you?" Rebecca asked softly. "Where will you go after Fort Collins?" "Wherever the trail leads," he replied, his tone suggesting he hadn't given it much thought. "I've got cattle to drive up from Texas next month." Rebecca studied him in the lantern light. There was something in his manner that spoke of a man unaccustomed to staying in one place for long. "Have you always been a drifter?" Tom's hands stilled for a moment. "Not always. Had a wife once, back in Texas. She died in childbed, along with our son. After that, staying put didn't make much sense." The simple statement, delivered without self-pity, made Rebecca's heart ache. "I'm sorry," she said. "Truly." Tom nodded acknowledgement, but didn't elaborate further. They ate their meal in companionable silence, the rabbit stew more delicious than Rebecca had expected from such simple ingredients. As night fell, Tom insisted Rebecca take the bed with Emma, while he kept watch from a chair by the door. "You don't have to stay awake all night," Rebecca protested. "You need rest too." "I'll sleep late," Tom assured her. "Old habit from trail drives. Besides, those riders are still out there somewhere." Rebecca settled on the bed with Emma, who had fallen asleep immediately after nursing. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Rebecca as she watched Tom's profile in the dying firelight. He sat alert, one hand resting near his holster revolver, his posture suggesting he could spring into action at any moment. "Tom," she said softly, "why are you really helping us? There must be dozens of women in trouble across the territory. Why risk yourself for me and Emma?" Tom was quiet for so long that Rebecca thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "5 years ago, I came across a woman and her daughter walking along the trail near El Paso. They were trying to reach family in Arizona after the woman's husband had gambled away everything they owned. I gave them water and directions, but didn't offer to escort them." He paused, staring into the glowing embers. 2 weeks later, I heard they'd been found dead. Exposure, most likely. Always figured if I'd done more, they might have made it. Rebecca absorbed his words. So, we're your redemption? Tom turned to look at her directly.
No.
You're just two people who needed help, and this time, I could provide it. The simplicity and honesty of his answer touched Rebecca deeply. Thank you, she whispered, for being the kind of man who stops this time. Tom nodded once, then turned back to his vigil. Rebecca closed her eyes, finding comfort in the knowledge that someone was watching over her and Emma. She woke to Tom's hand on her shoulder, his voice urgent but controlled. Riders approaching, he whispered. Get Emma ready. We need to move. The gray light of pre-dawn filtered through the cabin's single window as Rebecca quickly gathered their things. Emma, disturbed from sleep, began to fuss, and Rebecca hurriedly nursed her to keep her quiet. Tom peered out the window. 3 men, moving slowly. They're checking each cabin. We need to slip out the back before they reach us. Rebecca finished with Emma and secured her in the sling. Ready, she whispered. Tom led them through the back of the cabin, where loose boards created an exit just large enough to squeeze through. His horse was already saddled and waiting in a small stand of trees behind the structure. Stay low and move quickly, Tom instructed, helping Rebecca mount before swinging up behind her. They had just started to move away from the camp when a shout rang out. There, behind the cabins. Tom spurred the horse forward, and they plunged into the dense forest that bordered the mining camp. Shots rang out, bullets splintering tree bark around them as they zigzagged through the trees. Hold on, Tom urged, guiding the horse up a steep incline. Emma began to cry, terrified by the noise and sudden motion. Rebecca tried to soothe her while clinging to the saddle horn with her free hand. Behind them, she could hear the pursuers crashing through the underbrush. They emerged onto a narrow ridge that overlooked a deep ravine. Tom pulled the horse to a halt, assessing their options. There's a trail down the other side, he said quickly. Too steep for them to follow easily. We can gain ground there. As they started down the precarious path, more shots rang out. Tom grunted, and Rebecca felt him stiffen behind her. Tom, she asked fearfully. Keep going, he said, his voice tight with pain. Just a graze. They descended the ridge in a controlled slide, the horse picking its way carefully despite the urgency. At the bottom, they crossed a small stream, riding directly through the water for several hundred yards to hide their tracks before emerging on the far bank and continuing through a stand of pine trees. Only when they had put several miles between themselves and the mining camp did Tom finally slow their pace. Rebecca twisted in the saddle to look at him and gasped when she saw blood soaking through his shirt at the shoulder. That's not a graze, she said accusingly. It's not as bad as it looks, Tom insisted, though his face had grown pale. Bullet went clean through. We need to stop and tend to it, Rebecca said firmly. You'll bleed out otherwise. Tom looked as though he might argue, but nodded instead. There's a place ahead. Old trapper's cabin I've used before. We can rest there for a few hours. The cabin, little more than a one-room shack, appeared abandoned but maintained. Once inside, Rebecca helped Tom remove his shirt to examine the wound. The bullet had indeed passed through his upper shoulder, missing bone but leaving a painful furrow of torn flesh. I need to clean and bandage this, Rebecca said, setting Emma down on a blanket. Do you have any whiskey in your supplies? Tom nodded toward his saddlebags. Flask in the side pocket. Rebecca found the flask and a relatively clean shirt that she tore into strips for bandages. She worked efficiently, cleaning the wound with whiskey which made Tom hiss in pain despite his stoic expression, then binding it tightly. You've done this before, Tom observed. My father was a doctor, Rebecca explained. I assisted him sometimes. She tied off the bandage. He wanted me to follow in his profession, but women doctors aren't exactly welcomed, even in Philadelphia. Seems a waste, Tom commented. You have a steady hand. Rebecca smiled slightly. That's what my father said. She helped Tom into a clean shirt. You should rest. You've lost blood. Tom shook his head. We can't stay long. Those men will keep searching. At least eat something, Rebecca insisted. You need your strength. While Tom ate some jerky and drank water, Rebecca tended to Emma, who had settled down after the excitement of the morning. The baby seemed to be adapting to life on the trail with surprising resilience. She's a strong one, Tom commented, watching Emma grab at Rebecca's fingers. Like her father, Rebecca said softly. James was stubborn. Even when the consumption was at its worst, he insisted on working. Said a man provides for his family as long as he draws breath. Sounds like a good man. He was. Rebecca stroked Emma's cheek. I wish he could have seen her. He wanted a child so badly. Tom was quiet for a moment. My Hannah, my wife, she used to talk about all the children we would have. Said she wanted enough to fill a schoolhouse. A sad smile crossed his face. We had 2 good years together before. He trailed off, unable to finish. Rebecca reached across and touched his uninjured arm gently. I'm sorry, Tom. He nodded, accepting her sympathy without words. After a moment, he straightened. We should move on. Can't risk staying in one place too long. They continued their journey through the day, taking a circuitous route that Tom hoped would throw off their pursuers. By nightfall, Tom was running a low fever, though he tried to hide it from Rebecca. We need to find shelter for the night, she said as dusk approached. Your wound needs proper care. Tom pointed to a rock formation in the distance. There's a cave system there. We can take shelter and build a fire without it being visible from outside. The cave was dry and deeper than Rebecca had expected. Tom showed her how to arrange rocks to reflect the heat of a small fire back into the cave while minimizing smoke. They ate a simple meal of the last of their provisions, and Rebecca changed Tom's bandages, concerned by the heat radiating from his skin. The wound's not infected, she said after examination, but your body's fighting hard. You need rest, Tom. Real rest. Too exhausted to argue, Tom allowed Rebecca to make him comfortable on his bedroll. She placed her hand on his forehead, frowning at the fever. Emma was already asleep in a nest of blankets nearby. I'll keep watch, Rebecca said, picking up Tom's revolver. You know how to use that? He asked weakly. My father taught me, she replied. Philadelphia wasn't always safe, especially near his clinic. Tom studied her face in the firelight. You're full of surprises, Rebecca Turner. She smiled. Get some sleep. I'll wake you if there's trouble. As Tom drifted off, Rebecca sat by the cave entrance, the revolver heavy in her lap. The night was quiet except for the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of nocturnal creatures. The stars emerged in brilliant clarity, reminding Rebecca how far she was from the gas-lit streets of Philadelphia. She thought about the strange turn her life had taken. 3 days ago, she had been trapped in Redemption Creek, facing a future that made her blood run cold. Now she was in a cave in the wilderness, caring for a wounded cowboy who had risked his life for her and Emma. The danger wasn't past, but for the first time in months, Rebecca felt a spark of hope. Tom's fever broke sometime in the night. Rebecca had dozed off briefly, only to wake with a start and check on him. His forehead was cool to the touch, and his breathing had evened out. Relief washed over her, and she realized how worried she had been. When morning came, Tom was much improved. He insisted on continuing their journey despite Rebecca's concerns about his wound. Fort Collins is still 2 days' ride, he said as he saddled his horse. And we're not safe until we get there. They traveled more cautiously now, Tom constantly scanning their surroundings for signs of pursuit. By midday, they had reached a high plateau that offered views in all directions. No sign of them, Tom said after studying the landscape. We might have lost them. Or they might have given up, Rebecca suggested hopefully. Tom shook his head. Men like that don't give up easily. Sullivan's reputation depends on making examples of women who try to leave. They continued across the plateau, the landscape gradually changing from rugged mountains to rolling hills covered with grass and scattered pine trees. Late in the afternoon, they came upon a small homestead nestled in a protected valley. "Friendly?" Rebecca asked cautiously. Tom nodded. "The Hansons. Good people.
Norwegian immigrants.
They'll give us a meal and a place to sleep for the night." The Hansen family, Olaf, Ingrid, and their 4 children welcomed them warmly. When Ingrid learned they had a baby with them, she immediately took charge, providing fresh milk for Emma and clean clothes for Rebecca. After a hearty meal of stew and fresh bread, Ingrid showed Rebecca to a small bedroom where she could sleep with Emma. Tom would stay in the barn, a customary arrangement for male visitors. "Your husband, he is hurt," Ingrid observed in her accented English as Rebecca settled Emma in a borrowed cradle. "Oh, he's not," Rebecca began, then stopped herself. Perhaps it was safer to maintain the pretense of marriage. "Yes, there was an accident on the trail. But he's healing well." Ingrid nodded knowingly. Men, they never admit when they are hurt. "My Olaf, he once worked 3 days with broken ribs before I made him stop." She patted Rebecca's hand. "You rest now. Baby is safe here." Left alone, Rebecca sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the simple comfort of a real mattress and clean sheets. Emma was already asleep, content after a proper meal and bath. Through the window, Rebecca could see Tom helping Olaf with evening chores despite his injury, the 2 men working in companionable silence. She wondered what would happen when they reached Fort Collins. Would Tom simply deliver them to the Bailey Ranch and continue on his way? The thought brought an unexpected pang of sadness. In just a few days, Tom Wade had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Morning came with the sounds of farm life, roosters crowing, cattle lowing, and children's voices as the Hansen children began their chores. Rebecca joined Ingrid in the kitchen, Emma secured in a sling across her chest, and helped prepare breakfast for the household. Tom entered the kitchen looking rested, his injured arm moving with less stiffness than the day before. He nodded to Rebecca with a small smile. "Mrs. Hansen, that's the best night's sleep I've had in months," he said appreciatively. "Your barn is cleaner than most hotels." Ingrid laughed, setting a plate of eggs and salt pork before him. "Eat, Mr. Wade. You need strength to protect your family." Tom's eyes met Rebecca's briefly, but neither corrected Ingrid's assumption. After breakfast, Olaf pulled Tom aside for a private conversation. Rebecca watched through the window as the 2 men spoke earnestly, Olaf's expression grave as he gestured toward the east. When Tom returned to help Rebecca prepare for their departure, his face was serious. "Olaf says there's word of 3 men asking about a cowboy traveling with a woman and baby," he told her quietly. "They passed through a trading post 20 miles east of here yesterday." Rebecca's hand flew to her throat. "They're still looking for us." Tom nodded grimly. "Olaf's offered to let you and Emma stay here while I lead them away. Once they're gone, his son could escort you to Fort Collins." "No," Rebecca said immediately. "We stay together." "Rebecca, it's safer." "For whom?" she challenged. "Not for you, riding alone with an injured shoulder. Not for the Hansens who could be targeted for helping us." She stepped closer to him. "We started this journey together, and we'll finish it together." Tom studied her face, seeming to weigh her determination. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but we'll take a different route than planned. Longer, but less traveled." Olaf provided them with fresh supplies and directions to a little-known trail through the foothills. They left the Hansen homestead with promises to visit again under better circumstances. The new route took them through dense forests and across small, swift-flowing streams. Progress was slower than before, but Tom seemed confident they were avoiding their pursuers. "The Hansens will send them east if they come asking," he explained. "Should buy us time to reach Fort Collins." They made camp that night in a sheltered grove beside a stream. Emma, who had been remarkably patient throughout the journey, was becoming more active, reaching for things and babbling happily when Rebecca or Tom spoke to her. "She likes you," Rebecca observed as Emma grabbed at Tom's finger during their evening meal. Tom smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "Smart kid. Knows who brings the food." Rebecca laughed. "It's more than that. She hardly ever took to strangers in Redemption Creek. Even Mrs. Whitley, who watched her sometimes when I worked extra shifts, couldn't get her to stop crying." Tom wiggled his finger, making Emma giggle. "We understand each other, don't we, little one? Both of us know a good thing when we see it." His eyes flicked up to meet Rebecca's, and something unspoken passed between them. Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks and busied herself with preparing Emma for bed. The moment had been brief, but charged with meaning neither of them was ready to acknowledge. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect for traveling. They made good progress, and by midday, Tom announced they were less than a day's ride from Fort Collins. "We'll reach the Bailey Ranch by tomorrow afternoon," he said as they stopped to rest the horse and eat a cold lunch. "Old Man Bailey's gruff, but fair. You'll be safe there." Rebecca nodded, but her heart wasn't in it. The closer they got to their destination, the more conflicted she felt. Safety and stability for Emma were paramount, but the thought of Tom riding away left her feeling hollow. "What will you do after you deliver us?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Tom shrugged, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his healing wound. "Head back to Texas for that cattle drive. After that." He trailed off. "Never plan too far ahead. Trail life doesn't allow for it. Have you ever thought about settling somewhere?" Rebecca ventured. "Having a home base, at least?" Tom was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant horizon. "Used to think about it. After Hannah died, it seemed pointless. Nothing to come home to." Rebecca looked down at Emma, who was contentedly playing with a piece of grass. "Things change, though. Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it." Tom's gaze shifted to her face, his expression unreadable. "That it does," he agreed softly. The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Tom was on his feet instantly, hand on his gun. "Get to the trees," he ordered, helping Rebecca gather Emma and their belongings. "Stay hidden until I call for you." Rebecca hurried to the cover of a thick stand of pines, her heart pounding. From her position, she could see Tom standing beside his horse, seemingly relaxed but alert, his injured arm deliberately kept away from his gun to hide his weakness. 3 riders appeared on the trail, moving at a steady pace. As they drew closer, Rebecca recognized none of them from Redemption Creek. Relief washed over her until she saw Tom's posture stiffen. The lead rider, a heavy-set man with a bushy beard, raised his hand in greeting. "Afternoon, friend. Fine day for traveling." Tom nodded, but didn't relax. "Can I help you gentlemen with something?" "Maybe," the man replied. "We're looking for a woman and child who might have passed this way. Young woman, pretty, with a baby girl. Traveling with a cowboy. What's your interest in them?" Tom asked evenly. The bearded man smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. "Family matter. The lady's brother is mighty worried about her. Sent us to bring her home." It was a lie, and Rebecca knew Tom wouldn't believe it for a second. She held Emma closer, trying to keep the baby quiet. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," Tom said. "I've been trailing a herd that broke away from a drive. Been out here 3 days alone." The bearded man exchanged glances with his companions. "That right? Because we heard a cowboy with a wounded shoulder was seen helping a young mother." "You seem to be favoring your left arm there, friend." Tom's hand drifted closer to his gun. "Got thrown from my horse yesterday. Bruised it up some." "Mind if we take a look at that arm?" the man asked, his hand now resting openly on his holstered pistol. "I mind," Tom replied coldly. "I've answered your questions. Now move on." The tension in the air was palpable. Rebecca could see all 3 men subtly positioning themselves for a confrontation. Tom stood outnumbered and injured, yet his stance never wavered. "Last chance to cooperate," the bearded man warned. "Sullivan's offering good money for the woman. You don't need to get hurt over a saloon girl." "She's no saloon girl," Tom said, his voice hard as stone. "And you're not taking her anywhere." Rebecca saw the bearded man's hand twitch toward his gun and acted without thinking. Placing Emma safely on the ground behind a fallen log, she drew Tom's spare revolver from her bag and stepped out from the trees. "That's far enough," she called, the gun held steady in both hands. All four men turned in surprise. "I'm not going back to Sullivan or Hastings. Not today, not ever." Well, the bearded man chuckled. "The little lady has spirit. And a gun she probably doesn't know how to use." Rebecca thumbed back the hammer. "My father taught me to shoot when I was 12. I can hit a tin can at 30 paces. You're a much bigger target." Tom used the distraction to draw his own weapon. "You boys are outnumbered in determination, if not in guns. I suggest you leave while you still can." The three men exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the situation. Finally, the bearded man shrugged. "Sullivan didn't pay us enough to die over this. The woman's not worth it." "She's worth a damn sight more than all three of you put together," Tom replied evenly. "Now ride out. And tell Sullivan if he sends anyone else, they won't be riding back." The men turned their horses, the bearded one offering a mock salute. "No hard feelings, cowboy. Just doing a job." "Find honest work next time," Tom suggested coldly. They watched until the riders disappeared over a rise. Then Tom hurried to Rebecca's side. "Are you all right?" Rebecca nodded, suddenly shaky now that the danger had passed. She lowered the gun, and Tom gently took it from her hands. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen," he said, his voice a mixture of admiration and concern. "I couldn't let them hurt you," Rebecca replied simply. "Not after everything you've done for us." Tom's expression softened. He reached out to touch her face briefly, then seemed to catch himself and stepped back. "We should move on. They might change their minds if they think about it too long." They traveled hard for the rest of the day, not stopping until well after sunset. Tom chose their campsite carefully, a small clearing surrounded by thick underbrush that would hide the minimal fire they built. Emma, exhausted from the day's excitement, fell asleep almost immediately after nursing. Rebecca sat close to the fire, trying to ward off the evening chill. Tom settled beside her, offering his blanket. "You're shivering," he observed. "Just the excitement wearing off," she assured him, though she accepted the blanket gratefully. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the crackling of the fire the only sound besides Emma's soft breathing. "You saved my life today," Tom finally said. "Those men would have shot me without hesitation." Rebecca shook her head. "We saved each other. That's what we've been doing since you found us by that rock." Tom studied her face in the firelight. "What will you do at the Bailey Ranch?" "Whatever work they need," Rebecca replied. "Cook, clean, tend the house. As long as Emma is safe and we have a roof over our heads, I can do anything." "And if something better came along?" Tom asked, his voice carefully neutral. Rebecca looked at him questioningly. "What do you mean?" Tom seemed to struggle with his words, unusual for a man typically so direct. "I've been thinking about what you asked earlier, if I ever thought about settling somewhere." Rebecca's heart quickened. "And have you?" "I have land," Tom said. "Near Fort Collins, actually. 160 acres under the Homestead Act. Built a small cabin there last year, dug a well. Was planning to work it between cattle drives." "You never mentioned this before," Rebecca said softly. Tom shrugged. "Never seemed important until now." He looked away into the darkness beyond their fire. "It's good land. Could support a small herd, grow crops. Needs work, though. And it's a lonely place for one person." Rebecca hardly dared breathe, afraid to break the moment. Are you asking me something, Tom? He turned back to her, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. I'm not offering charity, Rebecca. And I'm not asking out of obligation. These past days, traveling with you and Emma. He paused, searching for words. You make me think about tomorrow again. About having something to come home to. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. Are you proposing a partnership or a marriage, Tom Wade? A small smile touched his lips. Both, I reckon. Though I know it's sudden, and you hardly know me, I know enough, Rebecca interrupted gently. I know you're a man who stops to help strangers in need, who risks his life to protect a woman and child he just met, who holds a baby as if she's made of porcelain but faces down armed men without flinching. She reached out to take his hand. I know you're a good man, Thomas Wade. The kind of man James would have wanted for Emma and me. Tom's fingers tightened around hers. Is that a yes? I think we could build something good together, Rebecca replied honestly. Emma needs a father. I need someone I can trust. Someone who sees me as more than just another woman to be used and discarded. You could never be just another anything, Rebecca, Tom said softly. From the moment I saw you by that rock, trying so hard to protect your daughter, I knew you were extraordinary. Rebecca felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Then yes, Tom. I'll come to your homestead instead of the Bailey Ranch. We can see what grows there both in the fields and between us. Tom reached out to touch her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. May I kiss you, Rebecca Turner? In answer, she leaned forward, meeting his lips with hers. The kiss was tender, tentative at first, then deepening as they both let go of the caution that had governed their interactions. When they finally parted, Rebecca felt breathless, as though she'd been running. That was worth waiting for, Tom said, his voice husky. Rebecca smiled, feeling happier than she had and longer than she could remember. I think this is the beginning of something wonderful, Tom Wade. For all three of us, he agreed, glancing at the sleeping Emma. They reached Tom's homestead the following afternoon. The cabin was indeed small, just 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, but solidly built. A creek ran nearby, and the land stretched out in gently rolling hills perfect for grazing cattle. It's not much, Tom said as he helped Rebecca down from the horse. But we can expand the cabin. Add rooms as needed. Rebecca surveyed their surroundings, seeing not what was but what could be. A garden there, perhaps chickens' coops there. Fruit trees along the creek. A home. It's perfect, she said sincerely. A place to start fresh. They spent the rest of the day settling in. Tom rode to a neighboring homestead to borrow some essentials, a cradle for Emma, some cooking supplies Rebecca would need, and returned with not only the items, but news that the nearest church had a visiting preacher who would be there for the next 2 days. If you're still of a mind, Tom said almost shyly, we could make things official before he leaves. Rebecca agreed readily. 2 days later, they stood before the preacher in the small church, Emma in Rebecca's arms, and exchanged simple vows. The few neighbors who had gathered to witness the ceremony congratulated them warmly, welcoming Rebecca to the community. That night, after Emma was asleep in her new cradle, Rebecca and Tom sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the stars emerge. I never expected this, Rebecca admitted, her head resting against Tom's shoulder. When I left Philadelphia, I thought I was heading toward hardship, just trying to survive for Emma's sake. And instead, Tom prompted, his arm around her waist. Rebecca smiled up at him. Instead, I found a home. And a good man to share it with. Tom kissed her gently. I found something I thought was lost forever, he said. A reason to come home at night. A future worth building. As spring turned to summer, the homestead began to take shape according to their shared vision. Tom added a proper bedroom to the cabin and began construction on a barn. Rebecca planted a vegetable garden and learned from neighboring women how to preserve food for the coming winter. Emma thrived in the clean mountain air, growing stronger and more curious each day. Tom still occasionally took work driving cattle, but his trips were shorter now, his eagerness to return home evident in the way he'd ride hard the last few miles, always bringing small gifts for Rebecca and Emma, a ribbon, a wooden toy, once even a rocking chair he'd strapped to his saddle. On a warm evening in late summer, as they sat on their expanded porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson, Rebecca placed Tom's hand over her still, flat stomach. "We'll need to add another room to the cabin," she said softly. "By spring." Tom's face registered shock, then joy so pure it brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. "Are you certain?" She nodded, smiling through her own tears. "The doctor in town confirmed it yesterday when I went for supplies." Tom gathered her into his arms, holding her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. "I never thought I'd have this again," he whispered against her hair. "A family, a child of my own." "Emma will be a wonderful big sister," Rebecca said, watching their daughter playing with wooden blocks on a blanket nearby. "And you'll be an even more wonderful mother to both of them," Tom replied, kissing her tenderly. The following spring, their son James Thomas Wade was born, a healthy, robust boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. Emma, not quite 2 years old, appointed herself as protector and helper, bringing blankets and toys to her baby with solemn dedication. The homestead prospered along with their family. Tom's small herd of cattle grew, and he built a reputation for fair dealing that brought buyers directly to their land. Rebecca, drawing on her father's medical knowledge, became known in the area for her skill with herbal remedies and basic medical care, often helping neighbors when the nearest doctor was too far away. 5 years after that fateful day, when Tom found Rebecca and Emma by the rock outcropping, their homestead had become one of the most successful in the region. The cabin had grown into a proper house with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. A barn housed their livestock, and fields of wheat and corn stretched toward the horizon. On the anniversary of their wedding, Tom surprised Rebecca with a small locket containing tiny portraits of Emma and James, now 7 and 5 years old. "To remind you how this all began," he said as he fastened it around her neck. "With a brave woman and a tiny baby who changed my life forever." Rebecca touched the locket, then reached up to caress his face, still weathered from years on the trail but softened now by contentment. "We saved each other, Tom Wade. And we built this life together, one day at a time. And we'll keep building it," Tom promised, pulling her close. "For Emma and James, and for ourselves." As they stood together on their porch, watching their children play in the yard they'd created from wilderness, Rebecca thought about the desperate woman she'd been, fleeing Redemption Creek with nothing but hope and determination. That woman could never have imagined the fullness of the life that awaited her, a life built on trust, respect, and a love that had grown stronger with each passing day. "No regrets?" Tom asked, seeming to read her thoughts. Rebecca smiled up at him, her heart full. "Not a single one. This is exactly where we were meant to be." And as the sun set behind the mountains they both now called home, Rebecca knew it was true. Every step of their journey, even the painful ones, had led them here, to this land, this family, this love that had saved them both.